In politics and public discourse, respect is often the first casualty. Debates turn into shouting matches, interviews become battlegrounds, and meaningful dialogue is lost in the noise. Yet, when Mark Levin and Jasmine Crockett faced each other, there was something unexpectedly different in the air. Despite the tension, despite their opposing ideologies, a subtle thread of respect lingered between them, not loud or obvious, but present in every pause, every calculated word, every restrained tone. Mark Levin, known for his fiery delivery and razor-sharp intellect, has spelt his career on challenging those who stand on the opposite side of the political aisle. His radio shows, books, and television appearances have cemented his reputation as a man who doesn't mince words. When he speaks, he commands attention, not just from his audience, but from his opponents as well. That evening, as he dissected spending policies and government accountability, his words carried the authority of someone who had spent decades studying the Constitution, courtrooms, and political systems. He was firm, confident, and unapologetically direct. Jasmine Crockett, however, is not easily intimidated. Her journey from the courtroom to Congress has been one marked by persistence and purpose. She's accustomed to strong personalities, two men who mistake assertiveness for aggression, and two critics who underestimate her ability to hold her own. So when Mark Levin turned his argument toward her, pressing on the inefficiencies of government spending and the moral contradictions of certain programs, she didn't react defensively. She listened, carefully, and that single act, listening, set the tone for what came next. There's a particular kind of strength and patience, and Crockett understood that well. Levin's approach was familiar. He presented statistics, quoted historical references, and delivered them with conviction. Many might have responded emotionally or tried to interrupt to regain footing. Crockett chose another path. She let him finish. She gave him space to speak fully, a move that reflected both confidence and control. It wasn't submission, it was strategy. By allowing Levin to lay out his complete argument, she not only showed respect for his experience but also positioned herself to respond from a place of authority rather than reaction. When she finally spoke, the balance shifted. She didn't raise her voice or mirror his intensity. Instead, she grounded the conversation in empathy. Her words didn't diminish Levin's argument, they expanded it. Mark, she said evenly, I understand your concern about overspending, but behind every dollar you're talking about, there's a person, a child, a teacher, a veteran. In that moment, the conversation transcended partisanship. It became human. Levin, though visibly skeptical, didn't interrupt. He let her speak, perhaps recognizing that her argument came from a place of genuine conviction. What unfolded in those moments wasn't humiliation or triumph. It was something more nuanced. Levin challenged Crockett's logic, and Crockett challenged Levin's framework. Yet neither resorted to the usual arsenal of personal jabs or mockery. Each held firm, but with restraint. Respect doesn't mean agreement, it means acknowledgement. Levin acknowledged that she had earned her platform, that she was not there by accident. And Crockett acknowledged Levin's intellect, even when she firmly disagreed with his conclusions. It was the kind of exchange that reminded viewers what debate was meant to be, not a war, but a conversation between people who believe deeply in their positions. At one point, Levin leaned slightly back in his chair, listening as Crockett explained how federal funds had helped rebuild parts of her district after natural disasters. He didn't interrupt, though he clearly wanted to. The camera caught his expression, part skepticism, part curiosity. It was subtle, but telling. Even a man as opinionated as Levin understood when to pause and consider another viewpoint. That small gesture, the silence of a usually dominant voice, was its own form of respect. Respect in debate doesn't come from agreement. It comes from the recognition that the person across from you is not your enemy, but your counterpart in pursuit of truth. Levin's sharpness and Crockett's composure reflected that duality perfectly. For every pointed question he asked, she responded with grounded assurance. For every rebuttal she offered, he countered with logic rather than disdain. It was less about who won the argument and more about how both managed to conduct it without losing sight of decency. Levin, despite his strong opinions, has always valued preparedness and intellect. He respects those who know their facts, who stand their ground with clarity rather than emotion, and Crockett earned that from him. By the end of their exchange, even as disagreements remained unresolved, Levin's tone softened slightly. He referred to her not as a politician or Democrat, but by name, a small but meaningful distinction. It was the kind of acknowledgement that comes only when one professional recognizes another. In an age where most debates are remembered for insults, this one stood out for a rare, quiet civility. Mark Levin, the veteran debater, and Jasmine Crockett, the rising political voice, reminded everyone watching that even in fierce disagreement, respect isn't weakness, it's strength. Composure has a way of shifting power in any debate. It's not the loudest voice that wins, but the one that remains steady when the other grows sharper. During the exchange between Mark Levin and Jasmine Crockett, this truth played out in real time. Levin entered the discussion with his trademark confidence, articulate, forceful, and ready to dismantle any argument with precision. His tone carried authority, the kind that comes from years behind microphones and courtrooms. For a moment, it seemed he had full control of the narrative. But Crockett, composed and deliberate, began to demonstrate that real strength isn't in domination, it's in discipline. Levin's questions came fast, layered with complex legal references and data points. He pressed Crockett on accountability, challenging her views with well-structured skepticism. His delivery was sharp, sometimes bordering on confrontational. It was the kind of approach that could easily rattle an opponent. Yet Crockett didn't waver. Her demeanor didn't show the slightest hint of irritation or defensiveness. Instead, she let Levin finish his points, nodding slightly as if acknowledging his experience before carefully formulating her response. When she finally spoke, her tone was even and composed. "Mark," she began, "you're absolutely right that we have to be careful with how we spend, but what you're describing doesn't always reflect the reality on the ground." There was no tremor in her voice, no rush to retaliate. Her calmness didn't dilute her argument, it amplified it. By refusing to match Levin's intensity, she changed the rhythm of the conversation. What was expected to be a verbal sparring match began to feel more like a deliberate exchange of ideas. Levin, known for his ability to corner guests, found himself facing someone who wasn't reacting emotionally, but thinking critically. Crockett's composure forced him to engage on her terms. The louder he got, the more she seemed to ground herself in stillness. The contrast was striking. The fiery commentator known for his passionate delivery now sitting across from a woman whose quiet confidence commanded equal attention. It wasn't defiance. It was control. She didn't need to overpower Levin's words, she simply outlasted their heat. At one point, Levin tried to challenge her numbers, suggesting that her data was incomplete. Crockett didn't rush to defend herself. Instead, she took a moment, flipped through her notes, and responded softly. "Actually, Mark, if you look at the full report from the Congressional Budget Office, you'll see those figures include the adjustments for inflation, which changes the picture you're describing." She didn't raise her voice or linger on the correction. She moved on seamlessly, as if the purpose wasn't to embarrass him but to stay factual. Levin hesitated for a split second, a pause that spoke volumes. That pause symbolized something that viewers immediately noticed. Crockett's composure had disarmed him. In debates, silence can be more powerful than interruption. It unsettles opponents who rely on rhythm and reaction. Levin, a master of verbal flow, found that flow interrupted not by force, but by patience. Her restraint left no openings for him to exploit, no emotional reaction to twist. Every time he pushed, she absorbed it, processed it, and responded with precision. The control she maintained wasn't just intellectual, it was emotional. This moment also highlighted an underappreciated truth about Mark Levin himself. For all his sharpness, he respects discipline. He has debated countless individuals who crumble under pressure, who confuse volume with conviction. Crockett didn't. She met his challenge with calm, and in doing so, earned something rare from him, measured attention. He may not have agreed with her conclusions, but he couldn't dismiss her composure. Even as he attempted to reassert his footing, his interruptions softened. His tone shifted, slightly less combative. A subtle recognition that he wasn't facing an ordinary opponent. Composure in conversation isn't just about staying calm. It's about controlling the emotional temperature of the room. Crockett's steadiness transformed what could have been an explosive clash into a thoughtful exchange. Viewers noticed how her demeanor affected Levin's posture. He began leaning back more, listening longer before responding. The dynamic between them evolved from confrontation to cautious respect. For someone like Levin who thrives on challenging ideas, that shift spoke louder than any concession. In politics, composure often reads as weakness, but in truth, it's one of the strongest forms of communication. Crockett demonstrated that you don't need to match intensity to command respect. You can hold power quietly, through patience, through poise. And Levin, intentionally or not, validated that principle simply by how he reacted. His expressions revealed acknowledgement, perhaps reluctant, but genuine, that Crockett's discipline had turned the tide of the conversation. The most telling moment came near the end of their debate. Levin posed one last question, tough, pointed, crafted to challenge her stance on accountability. Crockett paused, took a breath, and answered clearly, addressing each part of the question without digressing or deflecting. When she finished, there was a brief silence. Levin didn't interrupt, didn't immediately counter. For someone who rarely yields conversational ground, that silence was a testament to her composure. What began as a test of ideas became a demonstration of character. Crockett's ability to stay composed under pressure revealed something fundamental about her, an understanding that control isn't about overpowering others. It's about mastering yourself. And for Levin, who thrives in the storm of debate, encountering someone who found strength in stillness was a reminder that sometimes, the calmest voice in the room, there's a distinct moment in every great debate, when the focus shifts, when it stops being about technical details and starts being about what those details actually mean for real people. During the exchange between Mark Levin and Jasmine Crockett, That moment arrived when she reframed the entire discussion from fiscal responsibility to moral responsibility. Levin had built his argument on numbers, budgets, deficits, and efficiency. It was logical, factual, and deliberate. But Crockett, while acknowledging his facts, took the debate in a direction he hadn't anticipated. She didn't just talk about spending. She talked about values. And in doing so, she altered the emotional temperature of the conversation in a way that even Levin, with his years of broadcasting and debate experience, couldn't entirely counter. Mark Levin is no stranger to policy discussions. He has made a career of holding leaders accountable for how they handle taxpayer money. His reputation is built on fiscal conservatism and a deep understanding of constitutional governance. When he began dissecting Crockett's support for certain social programs, his tone carried the authority of someone who had spent decades studying the fine print of federal budgets. To him, it wasn't personal, it was principle. He argued that government should spend less, regulate wisely, and allow the free market to handle what bureaucracy often fails to fix. His words were deliberate, chosen to highlight inefficiency and waste. Crockett, however, saw the issue differently. As Levin cited figures and percentages, she waited, listening closely. Then she leaned in slightly, her tone calm but firm. "Mark," she said, "you're right that fiscal responsibility matters. But when we talk about responsibility, we can't leave out the people affected by those cuts. Responsibility isn't just about balancing a budget, it's about ensuring we're not balancing it on someone's back." That sentence marked a turning point. It wasn't confrontational, but it was powerful. It forced Levin, and everyone listening, to consider a different dimension of accountability. He had been focused on systems and structures. She brought it back to humanity. For a brief second, Levin seemed to measure his next words. His expression changed, not necessarily in agreement, but in recognition that she had reframed the discussion on her own terms. Levin, ever the debater, tried to regain footing. He countered by saying that compassion without structure leads to chaos, that moral decisions must still operate within the boundaries of financial discipline. It was a fair point, and he made it well. But Crockett didn't challenge that logic directly. Instead, she acknowledged it, then built upon it. "You're right," she said, "but moral decisions are what give structure meaning. Numbers can tell you how much something costs, but they can't tell you what it's worth." Her composure and clarity made the exchange unexpectedly reflective. Levin, known for his assertiveness, found himself navigating unfamiliar emotional territory. The debate was no longer about spreadsheets, it was about principles. Crockett's shift from fiscal to moral responsibility didn't negate his argument, it expanded it. She reminded the audience that governance isn't just about arithmetic, it's about empathy. Levin's respect for logic and structure remained unshaken, but he couldn't dismiss her approach. There was a quiet acknowledgement in how he adjusted his tone afterward. He no longer spoke over her. Instead, he responded point by point, engaging her ideas instead of just refuting them. For someone like Levin, that adjustment was meaningful. He has always valued strong arguments, and Crockett had presented one not through confrontation, but through reframing. This shift also highlighted a deeper contrast between the two. Levin represented the intellectual rigor of policy, the side that believes governance must first be efficient to be effective. Crockett represented the human side, the belief that governance must first be compassionate to be just. Neither dismissed the other entirely. Instead, they revealed how these two dimensions, when balanced, create the foundation of real leadership. At one point, Crockett mentioned programs that provided healthcare access in low-income communities, and how eliminating those funds might save dollars but cost lives. Levin listened, then challenged the sustainability of those initiatives. But this time, his tone had softened. "So where do we draw the line?" he asked. It wasn't rhetorical, it was genuine. And Crockett answered just as thoughtfully, "We draw it where policy meets people. Because when numbers start erasing faces, we've lost sight of what governance is for." In that moment, the debate wasn't about left or right, it was about perspective. Levin's emphasis on structure gave Crockett's moral argument weight, and her moral argument gave his structure meaning. Each, in their own way, revealed that fiscal and moral responsibility are not opposites but partners in the same pursuit. Levin's listeners, accustomed to hearing him dominate conversations, I saw a different side of him that day, one willing to pause and consider a viewpoint built on empathy. And Crockett, in turning the conversation toward human consequences, showed how composure and conviction can reshape even the most rigid debates. What made the exchange stand out wasn't that one of them won, it was that Crockett, by shifting the framework from fiscal logic to moral understanding, reminded everyone that behind every policy debate are real lives at stake, a truth Levin, even in disagreement, seemed to recognize in his silence. For viewers watching the exchange between Mark Levin and Jasmine Crockett, it became clear that the real lesson wasn't about politics or policy, it was about communication. In an era when debates often devolve into insults and interruptions, what stood out wasn't who was right or wrong, but how both handled disagreement. The moment revealed something fundamental. True strength in discussion isn't about being the loudest or most forceful voice in the room. It's about clarity, respect, and emotional intelligence, qualities that both, in very different ways, managed to display. Mark Levin has spent decades mastering the art of argument. His reputation is built on precision, confidence, and the ability to deconstruct an opponent's logic with speed and authority. Many of his interviews follow a familiar pattern. Levin pushes hard, and his guests struggle to keep up. It's what his audience expects of him: sharpness, certainty, and control. That night, however, he found himself in a conversation that didn't follow the usual rhythm. Jasmine Crockett didn't respond with the same kind of intensity. Instead, she approached the exchange with a quiet firmness that shifted the focus from confrontation to connection. Levin opened with pointed criticism about fiscal responsibility, his voice carrying the conviction of someone used to leading the room. He spoke in precise, measured sentences, emphasizing structure and logic. Crockett listened without interruption, her expression calm but engaged. When she did respond, her words were deliberate. She didn't try to match Levin's pace or tone. Instead, she spoke clearly, centering her responses around people rather than policies. It was this difference, her ability to speak with empathy instead of emotion, that caught viewers off guard. At one point, Levin leaned in, pressing her on accountability in government spending. His tone sharpened slightly, though still professional. "Representative Crockett," he said, "don't you think that when the government keeps increasing spending, it's the taxpayers who end up paying the price?" It was a classic Levin question, direct, logical, and designed to force a concession. Crockett smiled slightly before replying. "Mark," she said softly, "the taxpayers you're talking about are also the parents trying to afford childcare, the veterans who need better health care, the small business owners who can't recover without some help. So yes, they pay the price, but they also deserve the support." Her response wasn't defensive. It was grounded, and that grounding changed everything. Levin didn't interrupt her, as many might have expected. He listened. His silence wasn't agreement, but acknowledgement. It was a rare moment of balance between two people who saw the world differently, but respected each other's intent. What made Crockett's approach so effective wasn't just her words, it was her emotional control. She understood that debates are rarely won by dominating. They're won by connecting. Emotional intelligence doesn't mean avoiding disagreement. It means handling it with awareness and purpose. Levin, known for his command of logic, recognized that, over the course of the exchange, his tone subtly shifted from confrontational to conversational. He began to address her not just as an opponent, but as an equal participant in an important dialogue. That mutual respect became the quiet thread. Running through the rest of the discussion, Levin continued to challenge her ideas, but he did so with a tone that reflected consideration. Crockett, for her part, never mistook his firmness for hostility. She responded to his criticism not with emotion, but with evidence, empathy, and context. The result was something rare in modern media: two strong voices debating passionately without devolving into personal attacks. Levin's listeners, accustomed to fiery exchanges, noticed it too. Some commented later that while they disagreed with Crockett's politics, they respected her composure. Others admired Levin for allowing the conversation to stay civil, even when his arguments were challenged. It was a reminder that respect doesn't mean agreement, it means engaging with sincerity. What both demonstrated, perhaps unintentionally, was that clarity and respect can coexist even in the heat of debate. Levin's clarity of logic met Crockett's clarity of empathy, creating a balance that transcended ideology. Each knew their role: Levin, the veteran thinker, pushing for precision; Crockett, the empathetic advocate, grounding the discussion in humanity. Together, they modeled what intelligent disagreement should look like: passionate, principled, and civil. Toward the end of their discussion, the moderator tried to summarize both sides, but the tone of the room had already changed. Levin's closing remarks were measured. He said, "We'll always disagree on how government should operate, but I think we both care about seeing it work better." Crockett nodded, replying, "That's exactly it, Mark. The how may differ, but the why matters most." It was a small exchange, but it carried weight. For once, the focus wasn't on who won the argument. It was on how both managed to rise above the noise. Levin, the veteran debater, showed that listening is not weakness but wisdom. Crockett showed that compassion, when paired with knowledge, can be just as commanding as confidence. The debate ended not with applause, but with a rare kind of silence, the kind that follows when understanding replaces hostility, and respect becomes the real victory. When the cameras stopped rolling and the microphones went silent, something about the exchange between Mark Levin and Jasmine Crockett lingered, not in the form of outrage or viral but as a quiet example of what public discourse could look like if respect and intellect shared the stage. Both came into the discussion with strong convictions and very different philosophies. yet they walked away having given viewers something deeper than a clash of ideologies. They offered a reminder that real dialogue isn't about winning. It's about understanding. For Mark Levin, the conversation was another chance to defend the principles he has spent a lifetime articulating: accountability, discipline, and constitutional integrity. He came armed with facts, figures, and a sharp mind honed through decades of debate. Yet what stood out most wasn't his authority, but his willingness to pause, to listen, and to let the conversation breathe. That small act of restraint, a man known for his intensity, allowing space for another voice, carried more weight than any rebuttal. It revealed the mark of a seasoned thinker, someone confident enough in his ideas to engage without condescension. For Jasmine Crockett, the exchange was a chance to show that empathy and intellect can coexist. She didn't try to outshout Levin or undermine him. She matched his knowledge with understanding, his logic with humanity. Her calm delivery, paired with sharp reasoning, turned what might have been a contentious debate into an exercise in perspective. She didn't just defend her views, she expanded the frame of the discussion, moving it from spreadsheets to stories, from statistics to the people those numbers represent. Together, they reminded viewers that progress in any discussion doesn't come from humiliation, but from humility. The true purpose of debate is not to destroy the opposition, but to test ideas, to challenge assumptions, expose blind spots, and, sometimes, find common ground in unexpected places. When Levin acknowledged Crockett's composure and intellect, and when she reciprocated with respect for his discipline and experience, the conversation transcended politics. It became a reflection of shared humanity within disagreement. In a media landscape where outrage often overshadows insight, this exchange stood out precisely because it resisted the usual pattern. It didn't rely on insults or interruptions to keep attention. Instead, it relied on honesty. Both participants showed that respect doesn't require silence, and that conviction doesn't require contempt. When two sharp minds meet, and both are willing to listen, what results isn't chaos, it's clarity. In the end, no one won the debate in the traditional sense, but both Levin and Crockett walked away with something more valuable: credibility. Viewers saw Levin not only as the relentless constitutional scholar, but as a man capable of genuine reflection. They saw Crockett not only as a rising political voice, but as a leader who can stand firm without losing grace. Their exchange was a lesson, not just in policy, but in presence, reminding everyone that dignity in dialogue is not a relic of the past. It's a choice. And that night,